Thanks for dropping by again today, Mike. How you doing?
I'm great, Billy. Thanks. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. So, all right, I want to dive into work ethic. There was a Wall Street Journal piece in May, and it asked this interesting question: is the American work ethic dying? What's your take on that? How would you answer that question?
Yep.
For a man of
It's
words, that was a very quick response.
well, I don't want to be confused on my response here. Or confusing, but yes, it's not only dying, it's being redefined right in front of us. It's not only being redefined, it's it's actually becoming the affirmative enemy of many. And it's a scary thing to contemplate for me because my entire foundation is founded on awarding work ethic scholarships. For 13 years, we've been trying to reward this thing that is now becoming associated with something that's not only not good, but affirmatively bad. It's crazy. Work ethic and individualism and delayed gratification and so many of the things that a lot of people grew up with and always assumed were good are now being identified as problematic bits of language. A lot of parents are really concerned with what's being taught in schools right now. And part of what I think is coming out of these new curriculums that we're all reading about is this suspicion, this suspicion of the idea that it's still possible to learn a skill that's in demand, work your butt off, and prosper as a result. That belief, that's the belief that's under siege right now. And we're doing what we can to push back against it.
What do you think is driving that? Because it is interesting, this cultural conversation about work ethic and these changes that are happening, and maybe there is no answer, but what do you think are some of the things maybe driving that?
Well, work ethic goes hand in hand with personal responsibility. And if you believe that personal responsibility is another one of those words that's been co-opted and used as a cudgel, for instance, against people who are struggling, right? If you're predisposed to think that way, then that whole line of reasoning starts to follow, where you look with suspicion at success. That's really what I mean to say. And look, there are a lot of successful people in this country on dirty jobs. Probably 40 to 50 of the people that we featured were millionaires. You never would have known it because they were covered in something disgusting for the most part. But it's their work ethic, Billy. It's the 300 different dirty jobs over and over again and again. I heard the same thing from all of the people that we profiled. The single hardest thing to do for them today is to find people who are willing to learn a skill that's in demand, show up early, and stay late. That basic approach to working has fallen out of favor. Why? I'm not sure. It probably has something to do with the ever evolving definition of what a good job is.
Mm.
People don't aspire to work in the same way that they used to, and they've identified certain kinds of jobs as the enemy. And in a very general way, I'm afraid we've defined work as the enemy. The reason we're not happy is because of our job. The reason we're not satisfied is because of our boss. If only we had more time to spend doing things we love instead of this drudgery that we now call work. It's all part of a shifting narrative that I'm afraid is doing a real disservice to a whole generation of kids. My foundation, we award work ethic scholarships because we've seen it over 1,500 times. We know it's still possible
Wow.
to pick up a welding torch and go on to make six figures in 2 years. I've seen it literally hundreds of times, but people don't believe a skill combined with hard work can still lead to that level of prosperity. And it's a dangerous thing not to believe in.
Well, talk about Mike Rowe Works Foundation and your work there, because you just sort of hinted at that, giving the scholarships and the heart behind creating that. And you said 15. So I'm assuming you've helped a fair number of people now through
Mhm.
this foundation. So talk a little bit about the work there.
Well, the foundation began on Labor Day in 2008. It evolved very organically out of Dirty Jobs. Dirty Jobs was a huge hit that year, and I was doing well, but the economy was tanking. And a lot of people on the show started to tell me, it it's virtually impossible for us to hire anyone right now, which I thought was weird because the headlines in those days were all about the number of people unemployed. 8,
Right.
9,
Right.
10, 11% unemployment. And yet there were 2 or 3 million open jobs out there that nobody seemed to want. So MicroWorks began as a PR campaign for a few million great jobs that didn't require a 4-year degree that, for whatever reason, people weren't enthused about. Then it turned into a trade resource center where people could go online and investigate where these jobs were and look at different ways to get the necessary training, whether it's apprenticeships or fellowships or community college or whatever. And then by 2012, I thought I can do a better job by identifying specific people who have the qualities that I would like to reward and give them the money to get the training they need. And that's how work ethic scholarships began. Last month, we gave away $1 million. We do it every year. Um, and again, these are scholarships specifically for people who do not want to pursue a 4-year degree, but who are willing to learn a skill that's in demand: welding, steam
Hmm.
fitting, pipe fitting, carpentry, any of the construction trades, their healthcare positions. We help a lot of different people uh, who fall into that basic category. And it's been really gratifying, Billy, honestly, because for years it was just me out there going to Congress and, mouthing off and sharing,
Talking about it.
just talking about it. But
Yeah.
now I can go back and I can find people that we've helped 4 or 5 years ago and start to tell their stories, because their stories are incredible. Their stories. I just talked to a girl the other day, a young woman named Chloe Hudson. Chloe was going to be a plastic surgeon. She had her whole dream mapped out and then learned that she would have to borrow upwards of $400,000 to make all this happen. And she got cold feet and just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to learn to weld instead. We She applied for a work ethic scholarship. I thought she was terrific. We gave her enough money to get her welding certificate. Today, she's down in North Carolina working for Joe Gibbs Auto Racing, 6 figures a year plus. Prior to that, she worked at a nuclear power plant, I think, up in New England. This woman's 28 years old. She is a welder in demand. She has no debt. She loves what she does. She's a rock star. Telling her story is the most effective way I can think of to push back against this idea that work ethic is somehow the enemy, and allowing her to tell her story on a big platform, whether it's my Facebook page or a movie that the two of us are working on right now. That's way more persuasive to a 20-year-old who's trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his or her life. So the best way to
Yeah.
push back is just to tell true stories and get those success stories out there.
I mean, the reality is you could just do the job you do. You could keep talking about it and not have taken action to create this foundation, and yet you've done it. And I want to ask you, you just sort of spoke to it a little bit in the passion of how you talked about it, but how has this changed you? Because you're out there changing other people's lives. You're giving them the money, the resources they need to do these things. But how has that experience since 2008 with the foundation impacted you as an individual, as a person?
Huh. Look, the honest answer is fairly self-involved, I think, but it allows me to look in the mirror, to tell you the truth, and say, okay, this is this is the balance that you need in your life. Everybody wants a balanced life, but my career, everything I've done for money anyway, involves ego and fame. and cameras and TV shows and podcasts and books and me, right? So I am the brand. I can't I can't run my company or employ anybody unless I'm out there
Yeah.
delivering on some kind of a service. And so it's a very, very self-involved career, this one that I've chosen. Starting MicroWorks really just allows me to say, I mean, consider the conversation we're having now. You're not asking me about the next project. You're not asking me about, any of the things most people ask me about. You're saying, why is this missionary cause important to you? And it's really tempting to tell you it's because I'm a super nice guy who really wants to give back. But the truth is, it's the only way I can live with myself. It's the balance that I need in my own
But
life,
that's
you know?
because you're a super nice guy that you do it though, right? And that's
Is it?
why it is. I mean, I think it's part of it though, because you're giving back. There's a lot of people who don't give back because they don't worry about how they're going to feel if they don't. And I think there's something to that. But
Yeah,
I don't know. It's
but
got to be amazing to hear these stories of the people you've helped.
look, it is amazing, and it's impossibly gratifying. The reason I hedge whenever I talk about this topic is because I think there's an element of selfishness in all good works.
Sure.
And I'm not afraid of that. And I used to be. I used to hesitate to say this, but what I'm trying to articulate is probably better expressed when the flight attendant tells you before takeoff what to do in the event of a sudden loss of pressure. When we lose altitude and the oxygen masks drop, what does she tell you to do? Or he? It's not take care of the person next to you. It's take care of yourself. The first thing you do is you take your mask and you put it on your face. Until or unless you do that, you're of no use to the person sitting beside you or in front of you or behind you. You have to you have to take care of yourself. And then you can decide, okay, can I be of use? Do I wish to be of use? Right? So I did this show for a couple years on Facebook called Returning the Favor. It's very similar to Somebody's Got to Do It, where we looked for people who were affirmatively doing something good in their community. And I would always ask them the question you're asking me, why do you do this? You know, and I was surprised how few people actually said, because it makes me feel good, period.
Hmm.
There's always an element of it, but there's a hesitation to lean into that fundamental truth. And now
Isn't
that's
admitting
not.
it humility a little bit though too? I mean, I actually think it's an act of humility to admit that, because you're saying, listen, there's, and everyone knows that you feel good when you do the right thing, when you do good things, and I think it's actually a healthy thing to be able to admit that as you are and talk about that. And to me, rather than a selfishness, which I do understand why somebody would say that, I think it is actually an act of humility, interestingly.
Well, thanks. I'll take that. That's a compliment, and I appreciate it, because look, a lot of good things happened to me in my career as a result of straight up, time to eat a piece of humble pie, dude. It is time, right? You've gone as far as you're going to go pretending to know more than you do. That was the big lesson of dirty jobs. Tell the truth. If you don't know how to do a thing, say, I'm not sure how to do it. And if you're going to start a 501c3, if you're going to start a foundation, if you're going to put yourself out there as another bloody do-gooder, then be honest about your motivations. Like for me, it's a very personal foundation. I told you in a prior conversation, dirty jobs happened as a result of it was a tribute to my granddad. Well, this foundation is his legacy. He never knew it existed. He didn't live long enough to see it. But the idea of keeping the trades alive, the idea of keeping work ethic alive by encouraging the behavior that we want to reward, that's personal to me. But if you're me, you can't do anything personally. You have to do everything publicly. Otherwise, well, who cares, right?
Right.
It's a weird balancing act that I try and do. I try and stay in my lane. I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing or some boomer yelling at some kid to get off his lawn. And that's the danger when we talk about work ethic and delayed gratification and a positive attitude and personal responsibility and rugged individualism and all these things that'll make a lot of Gen Zs roll their eyes and say, yeah, okay. But those things still matter. Those things all by themselves are not enough. But when you combine them with a willingness to learn a skill that's in demand, then you have a recipe for success. And not to belabor the point, but 10 years ago, I was saying the exact same thing. I just didn't have enough evidence that demanded a verdict. I didn't have enough proof. Today, I've got the proof. I got 1,400 people that I can point you to. And that's powerful. And it is humbling, because in the end, the power of this message is not going to come from me. It's going to come from Chloe Hudson. It's going to come from Ben Ferreira. It's going to come from there's so many who actually walk the walk. So I'm playing the cards I got as best I can, and trying to tell the stories of the people who I think there are narratives out there that can make a difference. And I think, unfortunately, you're right. The Wall Street Journal was right. So we have to push back, and we have to do it in a way that's persuasive.
Well, and you're doing it, and people can watch the stories on Somebody's Got to Do It, which is streaming season 1 on Pure Flix right now. Last question. If there's a parent watching, if somebody, even a young person watching, and they want to get into the skills trade, or they want to inspire their kid to do it, but they're just not really sure the best way to kind of explore that or start that path. Maybe they're like you were in a prior conversation. We talked about how you came to a point where you realized, hey, maybe what I want to do isn't what I should be doing. How do they take those natural steps to find that place for themselves?
You set the table fairly. You just make sure your kid has a chance to give every possible vocation an honest look. The internet can be your friend in this world. You can go to mikerowe.com and you can look at all sorts of different trades, but there are lots of other places you can go as well. There are lots of other people you can talk to. You might not be a tradesman, but the odds are pretty good you've had somebody in your home working on your heater, your air conditioner, your refrigerator. Talk to those people. You'd be surprised how forthcoming many of them will be. They'll tell you what they're making. They'll tell you what that path looked like. You'll also be surprised at how many go on to start their own businesses. We forget a lot that the path to small businesses is often paved with a skilled trade. That's often where it starts. So I would just put all of it on the table and encourage the kids to be open to the fact that just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're going to love it. And just because you love something doesn't mean you're going to be good at it. That's just the way life is. And when we took shop class out of high school, Billy, that had a terrible unintended consequence, because we removed all the optical proof, right? For millions of kids, we just said, there's nothing to see here. You can't even look at home ec. You can't even look at metal shop or auto shop or wood shop. It's like, these vocations mean so little to us now. We're not even going to let you look at them. That's why we have such a giant shortage in the skilled trades today. It's also why we've got $1.7 trillion in student loans on the books. We're still telling people in a very, very cookie cutter way that the best path for the most people is the most expensive path. So as a parent, I would just say, make sure your kids get an honest look at all of it. I have no idea what's best for their particular journey, but I would say that debt is not your friend in this world, and you've got to look very, very carefully at the real cost of whatever education you decide on.
Well, listen, as always, lots of wisdom and lots of truth in there. Thanks for your time, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Billy.